Hello there, welcome to the next session of Rugby Nats Chat Show. We spoke briefly last week about children being driven away from the game because of pushy parents and pushy coaches, and the subject of the ACE leagues and the players coming to and from the higher levels was mentioned, and it attracted a bit of attention on Facebook or Twitface or whatever it's called. Quite a couple of interesting points made.
Yeah, I think so. I think the point made was that you're dealing with a minority of players, but you're dealing with guys who would probably be at the top end of the playing scale. Mm-hmm. And whilst they're a minority in number, quite a high proportion of them leave the game. Now, I've got personal experience of players involved with Relegensians who were affiliated with a professional club on an ACE scheme, and once that scheme had finished and they were given the rather bad news that they haven't made it, then they walked, or a proportion of them have walked away from the game. And I've seen the same thing whilst coaching at Reading University, guys who've had quite a promising, or what they consider to be a promising start in the game, attracted the interest of professional clubs, but it's never materialised. They lose a bit of heart. They've come to university and we're there. We have to engender that enthusiasm back. And I feel that what came through the remarks, and it's also my thinking, is that I think it's about time we had from the RFU some leadership on this issue. There are a high proportion, as we've already discussed, of the 18s to 24s leaving the game. Now, that's for a variety of reasons. You know, society's changed, and we don't want to keep on going on about it. People do find other things to do. But we don't really know what proportion of these fellas who have been whisked out of their clubs are actually leaving the game. Because I think one of the observations you've made, and something that you felt, is that there's been very little feedback between the Premiership clubs, the ACE colleges, and the clubs where these players originated from.
Well, that is very much my experience. I mean, at this moment in time, we've got one young lad who's at a Premiership club and he's doing very well. He's on the bench and I think he's even had a couple of starts, to be fair. But my general overriding experience is that the lads don't come back to the club. They don't cut the mustard for whatever reason. And I can't help thinking, and I'm going to talk about a report I read a couple of days ago, but I can't help thinking that this could be so much more structured. So if someone's not cutting the mustard, they're not coming up to standard, surely it's got to be the responsibility of the people that have whisked them away in the first place to get in touch with the club and say, right, Paul or whoever at the club, young man so-and-so, we're finding problems with his skill sets. He needs to come back to the club for a while. He needs to work on his tackling, or he needs to work on his distribution, or whatever it is. Can we set up a meeting? Can we chat about this? Can we talk to his head coach? Can we talk to him? Can we manage this back? Because I've had half a dozen of these lads whisked away and they are not playing rugby.
No, and I think, you know, from the comments on Facebook and Twitter, that seems to be a general concern.
Yeah.
And what surprises me is that the professional clubs, okay, they have their owners and their investors, but they also get a high proportion of their money out of the game. And where does that money come from? Well, okay, it comes from internationals, but it comes from all rugby clubs, within the union. So I think they need to be brought under control and say, you've got to, I agree with you entirely. You have to set up some sort of system where their progress is monitored, and rather than actually just forgetting about those players, they are encouraged to go back to their clubs. I mean, we had a couple of cases where a number of them went to a Pacific college playing in the ACE scheme, and they were told, well, that's it, you can't play for your clubs, you're either playing for us on a Wednesday or you're training, but you can't go and play for them on a Sunday, even if we don't have a game. And I think I've made that point before. Now, I think that's farcical. You've got to keep them linked to their clubs.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing as well that occurred to me after reading the comments and you and I talking was we're talking about the ACE thing, which by inference means that we're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-olds. But actually, it's happening lower down. when they go off to these academies or the gold group or the bronze group, at 13, 15, they're not cutting the mustard there, and they're still not coming back.
No, and the other thing I've actually noticed now, personal experience of recently, on a particularly wet Sunday morning in Maidenhead, was that we now have this selection process extended to the under 13s.
Yeah.
Now, the union, fair play to them, have tried to take the pressure off players by taking the league and competition out of the 13-14s age group.
Yeah.
But all that's happening now is we're putting further pressure on players to actually to try and get onto these schemes, etc., which the clubs will eventually take ownership of, and try and get them in, playing or progressing in a professional environment. Now, I understand parents have to have ambitions for their children. They have to look after their children's interests. But I do question really going down that route. I think it's
that
ridiculous. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's just copying football, where they're just hoovered up and then the majority are just spat out.
Yeah.
Now, even football is beginning to acknowledge that that's wrong. Now, we've got to have some morals in the game. We've got to have some standards, and I think we've got to start looking after young people.
Yeah.
And also looking after the interests of the clubs.
The report I mentioned, it's available on the internet. I found it. I can't remember what search term I used, but it was a thesis done by a New Zealander guy who was going for his PhD, his doctorate. And he was, I think he was entitled "Game of Two Halves," and it was he was allowed access to clubs and teams and elite players in New Zealand and in New South Wales, and he was collecting a load of data, and the reason why it's called a game of two halves is the elite players that succeed, the environment, the facilities, the training is right up there.
Yeah.
But he was absolutely scathing about the ones that don't succeed.
Yes.
And he detected loads of different behaviours with these lads. It was very male orientated, I'm afraid to say. I don't think he had any ability to collect information on the ladies. But the report said that the clubs, he named loads of top level coaches that we see on television and hear on television, and he named them all. They all pay lip service to looking after these youngsters' well-being, but they're not providing any education. It's leading to a little bit of like Stockholm syndrome. These youngsters don't know what to do outside of rugby. They have low personal esteem outside of a rugby environment. And some of the lads he spoke to, especially the ones that were in and around the New Zealand setup, were, when they were released, there was no work being done with them to prepare them for the outside world. Some of them couldn't even pay bills because they'd been so institutionalised. They couldn't pay bills. They had nothing on their CV. It was virtually blank.
Yeah.
And his conclusions. There was 4 main conclusions, but the conclusions were the opening paragraph to the conclusions was saying the game is failing these people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think we need the same thing over here. I think that we have at the top level of the underage game, especially with the under-20s in England, they have a success. They've been very successful in World Cups and in the Six Nations competition.
Last few years.
And they have produced some good youngsters, as we see now coming through to the present England squad. And I think that side of it is going particularly well. But I hope that those boys who do not make it, I don't hope. I think we need to actually look at the guys who don't make it and make sure that they are looked after and that they can come back into the environment of their clubs and generally operate in society.
Well, absolutely. And I don't know the extent to which we are doing anything about it. I know with senior players, with adults that are coming towards the end of their professional career, the rugby players...
they all became coaches, don't they?
Yeah, or TV
get
pundits.
jobs for the mates.
But the Rugby Players Union are quite proactive in getting them skilled up with work outside in the outside environment or finishing off education. Well, I don't know how far that cascades down. But
I think the union has a moral obligation to ensure that it does. And I think
the youngsters are in the union.
And I think the professional, the rugby union. Sorry, and I think the the same applies for these professional clubs. You know, that they need to ensure that those who are not making it actually are looked after, as we keep on, droning on.
I know football are doing something about it, because a friend of mine, about 8 or 9 years ago, because of his profession, he owned a recruitment company, so he knows his way around a CV, and he got a contract with the FA to go around to all the Premiership clubs, and he was going into all the academies, and it was like a classroom environment. It was part of their education to learn how to write a CV.
Yeah,
and he taught them how to write 2 CVs: a football one in case they didn't make it in the Premiership, but they wanted to go for, they wanted to sort of enter the Championship or Division 1 or 2 or whatever, but also a personal CV, and also he talked to them about skills gap analysis.
Yes.
So that he could then talk to the club and say, well, look, this guy's got an interest in mechanics.
Yeah.
And so evening classes in mechanics wouldn't be a bad idea for this lad while he's training all day long and all that sort of stuff, which is a similar sort of thing that this report or thesis that I read said. But it is very interesting. Unless you and I have missed something, I'm not aware that we have anything in detail about that. I suspect it's probably happening with a couple of individuals at these Premiership clubs who are very, very welfare orientated or whatever. But I think it really ought to be a programme.
Well, I think so, and I think it should be brought out into the open so we know what's going on.
Yeah.
The grassroots club take a little bit of stick for perhaps not looking after that Pacific age group, and guys leaving. Well, let's have a whole look at the game and see where players are going, and let's also look at the professional game and what happens to the boys who do not make it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We would be welcoming your views on this. We think it's quite a controversial subject, but I think it's quite important. We've got to look after youth in the game, and we've got to keep them in the game. So do please contact us.
Comment away. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.